Hey everyone, it is Thursday, and you know what that means in our expert series? That means we bring back Jonathan Twomley. How you doing, sir?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Well, it's Thursday. That means you and I get lucky and we get to talk about new unemployment claims and continuing claims when we start. So did you see the numbers this morning?
I did indeed.
Yeah. What'd you think? What was your first reaction?
Well, I mean, in the new normal, it continues to be under 900,000, which is better, right? It's less bad than it could be.
Yeah.
Right. But the trend is, again, it was a little bit higher than expectations from economists. So that's not good. They thought things would be a little bit better. Yeah. The continuing claims have gone up.
Yeah, that's the one that I watch. That's problematic. And just so we know, in case you haven't seen the numbers, they came out this morning. 884,000 was the claims for the week, new claims. Expected 850, as Jonathan said, missed it. But continuing claims, they were expecting sub 13 million, and they came in just shy of 13.4 million. So I'd call those both a miss, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and again, it sort of continues the fact that we had a period of time where the new unemployment claims were dropping pretty rapidly,
precipitously,
right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And the continuing claims were trending downward.
Mm-hmm.
Now we've hit a place where we're kind of plateauing, right? Or the rate of change has slowed down.
I think that's fair. Yeah.
And that's what you and I have said we expected to see over time, as the low-hanging fruit that comes from just bringing people back to their jobs, like to the restaurants that reopen and stuff like that. That low-hanging fruit, you could rapidly decrease the numbers by bringing back that. But you reach a point where you run out of the low-hanging fruit, and now it's the stuff that's businesses permanently going out of business, or the people that, as we both expected, the corporations that are taking advantage of this situation to not bring people back and make them permanently unemployed, because they're going to go for automation instead, or they've just, we've had a very long period of a robust economy, and that usually results in fat accumulating within companies.
Correct.
And then the opportunity when you have a recession is to, get more from less. So you let go of all the dead weight and you make the people that stay work more. And that's, how it works. So I think we're seeing some of that as well. And we haven't really reached a point where the unemployment numbers look really good before, say, we have a second wave in the fall. As May, I think, I still think it's pretty likely that it's happening. I'm certainly personally assuming that we're going to have a second wave, a second round of quarantines and lockdowns. And I'm just preparing for that myself. So, hopefully I'm wrong. I'd love to be wrong, but
I think that's fair.
But I just think that the reality is, when you start bringing kids back to school, start, sending people back to work, it's just going to result in more cases. And, we've got, I don't know if you're following the Sturgis story, but it seems like
I have.
The Sturgis event could turn into a super spreader event. I think it's still, the jury's still out for me. I saw an article about how 260,000 cases could be traced
back.
But that seemed to be like sort of economists speculating about what could be, rather than any actual real.
Yeah, I read the same thing. It caught my attention. I think the article I read talked about 20% of new cases can be traced back to that, that motorcycle event. And then I read the article. I'm like, you are making so many assumptions and connections.
Yeah. It was all just based on a statistical model, right, of what could happen, as opposed to any actual real tracing. Nevertheless, you put 500,000 people together who aren't wearing masks, and you're going to have some. The effect of that cannot be zero, right?
No,
it's
exactly.
Be something. Just how big it is, we'll see. But I think.
Well, I think that's something we're gonna have to watch, because the thing that, again, this is all happening, right? I think we talked 2 weeks ago about North Carolina, right, coming back to classes, then suddenly have to going online. Yeah. The one thing I like that they're doing at universities is they're keeping the kids there, because unlike Sturgis, people went home.
Right.
Right. Here they're keeping the kids localized, right, in their dorms, so they don't infect it doesn't spread like that. So
Yeah.
we're making better decisions, I think.
It's interesting. It's funny that this is played out this way, because over the summer when I was in upstate New York, I was talking to a friend up there about Cornell, and he was telling me that Cornell had actually run some analysis and decided that fewer infections would result if they brought the kids all to campus and kept them there than if they didn't. And everybody's sort of making fun of them for like, this is silly and self-interested, and obviously they're just bringing kids to campus to pay and stuff like that. But I think that maybe this is true. Like if the kids get infected and you keep them there, they're not going home and spreading it to more people.
It stays, generally speaking, with the healthiest age group as well, right? So it's we got to take the risk of death off the table. I think that's a good move. I think Cornell, I mean, I get the argument, right? Kind of self-serving, but now we're in it. I think pretty astute observation. So good for them. So let's switch gears a little bit, put unemployment, political health crisis away from us. There's something that has come to my attention. I just think we need to talk about, right? Both of us are investors. What makes you and I different than most is we have both made hard decisions in the past to sell. And more importantly, not only sell, but also not buy, right? There are talk tracks out there, and this goes from stocks to Bitcoin to gold to oil to single family home to apartments to all of them. Some people are out there and they're always saying it's time to buy, no matter what the data says. And that mindset, I believe, is toxic. I believe it's wrong. I believe it hurts people. And that's one of the reasons I reached out to you way back in the beginning, because that first interview we did where you sold your portfolio, I'm like, that's a guy I can get behind. And I just think we need to realize, I think people need to hear that it's not always the right time to buy anything, whether it's an apartment, Bitcoin, gold, stocks. Do you see it the same way?
Yeah, I do. I mean, look, it's a balancing act, because on the one hand, if you're not in the market, you can't make money, right? So you can't make money by never buying, right? And so you have to keep that in mind on the one hand. On the other hand, as Warren Buffett says, making money is hard and losing money is easy, right?
I love that.
It takes a long time to make money, but it can be lost very, very quickly. And basically, a lifetime of great performance can be wiped out by a single bad deal or a single bad performance, right? Maybe if your portfolio is big enough, one bad deal is not going to kill you. But if you really can, it's much harder to make money than it is to lose money. And so you have to really, especially when the market is tight, you have to really be thinking, I think, more than anything, about your downside risk. And this is, I mean, humans in general have a bad time assessing risk. They tend to assign more risk to dramatic events and recent events than is necessary. So for instance, after a plane crash, people are afraid to get on planes, even though statistically there's no difference in the risk, and it's actually very low risk activity. But it's spectacular. It's in the news. But like car crashes, which are much more common, people aren't afraid to get into a car because they're not seeing car crashes on the news, right? They're not. The perceived risk is lower. Terrorist events, your chances of getting involved in a terrorist attack are about the same as getting eaten by a shark. And people are very afraid of both of those things, even though your chances, like if you're afraid of that, you probably should just never leave your house and walk down the street, because getting hit by a car is a much higher risk, right? So I think what happens with investments is that people also they watch the markets and they see the markets going up for a very long time, and they find it very difficult to perceive of them going down. And then especially what we have in the last 10 years in particular, maybe really the last 20, and especially in the last 6 months, and you and I have ranted about this, is that the government is doing the best job it possibly can to take risk out of the market, to support the markets. And the problem with that is that they can do it for a period of time, but at some point the juice just runs out, right? It just stops working. And then what you have is, an even worse financial panic, because people suddenly realize, like, wait a minute, the government can't support us. And now there's nothing, they have no more arrows in their quiver. And oh my goodness, now's the time to panic sell. And so, but you can't predict the timing of these things either. So the thing is that people, it's very easy for people to then get into the mindset of it's always the time to buy, because, if it's good times, it's the time to buy. If it's bad times, the government's going to come in, it's going to step in and make it good times again. And it makes people complacent. And I think it leads people to overpaying, and it leads people to not understanding the risks, or just discounting the risks, or deciding there are no risks. And I'm hearing a lot of this in the multifamily sort of scuttlebutt right now, where people have become very complacent because of, in March when COVID hit, everybody did the right thing and they all hoarded cash, and they said, we don't know what's coming, so we're going to prepare for it. And then what happened was we had 6 months of the government, paying people a lot of money, and that allowed them to pay their rent. And so everyone went, oh, and so I've seen the complacency build up. I talk a lot with my colleagues, and I can see the change in attitude that has gone from, wow, we really better prepare for this, to everything's fine, full steam ahead. Because they've been lulled into I think, false sense of complacency because of all the money that's out there. But this money is running out, right? The money is running out. The Congress is not doing anything to pump more money into the system right now. The Democrats and Republicans can't agree. The president put together this extension on his own through executive action, which is of dubious legality, but nobody's going to challenge it because it kind of benefits everybody. It's in nobody's interest to challenge it. So it's going to happen, but that's also running out, right? I actually didn't realize how short that was.
It's only 4 or 5 weeks.
Yeah. So that's extended things a little bit. The latest plan that the Republicans have put out, which is apparently a non-starter with the Democrats.
Yeah. How sad is that? How sad? The skinny deal is a non-starter. I think that is sad beyond belief.
Yeah, it's just not going anywhere. So, and that's, but even if it were enacted, it reduces the supplemental unemployment to $300 extra a week.
Yeah, which is one way to look at it, but also it goes up from zero, which is where we are.
Well, yes, that's true, except that we've had this extension, right? So we had this sort of stopgap from the executive. So but the thing is, here's the problem. We don't really know what effect any of this is having yet, right? We don't know. We haven't seen the data for September rent collections, or I haven't anyway. I should go look for this to see what the impact of the money running out has been. Through August it was fine, but it ran out in August, and so. Well,
also on top of that, the CDC thing that our president put in act is also going to be a problem.
Yeah, so let's talk about that next. But but we still don't know. Like you and I've been saying for a long time, there's been this false sense of security created by all this extra money in the system, but now the money is run out and we don't know what the effect is. We don't know, so say for instance, how much money people have banked in anticipation of it ending, right? We don't know, how many people are, not getting any more money and have spent all their money, right? We don't really know how this is playing out yet. And until you have, as an investor, I want certainty. It doesn't have to be good news. I just have to know what the news is, right?
Totally
because
agree.
Whatever the news is, I can use that to inform myself in investment decisions.
Agreed.
Right? The problem is when I don't know what the news is, then it becomes impossible to pick a direction.
Correct.
Right? And I think, but a lot of people have taken all the good news to mean, oh, it's only good news. And when you look at the stock market, it's had some rough spots recently, which I think are reflecting the fact that people are starting to get a little anxious about where we are, right? That there's a sense that, the stock market is overvalued, and maybe the kind of like trying to just invest before the next guy does and take advantage of him, like that.
The greater fool.
The greater fool may be sort of running out now. I think people are starting to feel like that like, okay, this has gone on for a while,
Mhm.
and maybe it's not going to go on for that much longer now. So, but in the real estate world, all I'm seeing is full steam ahead, and it's reflected in the latest reports on pricing. Um,
Yeah.
Multifamily is only down. I'm going to pull this up, but multifamily is so since pre-COVID, multifamily prices are only down by 8%,
Mm.
and that's actually only a 3% reduction as compared to last year, right?
Mhm.
So and manufactured homes, so mobile homes, are actually up 10% since last year, and they're up 3% from before
Interesting.
COVID. And I think this is really running on the assumption that these assets do well in recessions, which I think is an oversimplification at best
Mhm.
and dubious at worst, right? It really
Sure.
depends on who your tenants are and what the local economy is grounded in, right?
Yeah.
And if you're investing in C properties, which have more working class tenants, and you're in a very sensitive, their jobs are economically sensitive, then you are going to have some big problems
Yeah.
on your property as unemployment goes up and these benefits run out. But I think you wanted to say something.
No,
Sorry.
I think you're right. And again, this all started from the fact that it can't always be the right answer to buy. There has to be a time to sell. And a couple of things I want to say there. First and foremost, I get asked to speak to lots of people on this show, and I say no to more people than you would think, because one of my questions goes like this: well, great, you want to talk about whatever, say Bitcoin, say gold, say whatever it is. I'm game to talk about anything, right? But then I say, well, when would you sell, right? When's a bad time, right? And I'm okay with you telling me today's a good time, but when in the last 20 years was it a bad time? Because I've been looking at this shit for 20 years, and nothing has always been good. So tell me when the bad time is. And when somebody pontificates about this, that, and it's always good, I'm like, well, we're not scheduling this interview because I don't want to. It's just not true.
Yeah.
And that just really bothers me. And then back to multifamily. As everybody knows on my show, I sold a couple in 2019, felt really good. January, February felt really good. March and April kind of pivoted, like we talked about a month ago, going, maybe things get a little bit better, right? Because, Fresno's going to see a population increase is my new thesis, which I didn't see before, right? It's a suburb of some very expensive markets. And I'm like, And now I see back to what I'm calling stupid money come in for apartments in Fresno. The inventory is so low. We're seeing cap rates on a couple of deals sub 5. And Fresno's a second tier city, which historically meant it's a 6.5, 7 for the good stuff. So, I mean, I guess it's a lack of inventory and some hot money that just feels like it has to be placed. But, that hot money, I believe the party's going to end badly for them. And commercial debt changes, right? 5 years from now, 3 years, whatever, is it short-term bridge loan? It's just not always the time to buy, people, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I mean, and again, it depends on your objectives, but it also depends on what you're buying and why you believe it's good. I mean, like, I'm involved in a deal right now. We've talked about this before.
Yeah.
And I agreed to become involved in this deal because I thought it was positioned for the downside.
Okay.
Right.
Yep.
And that what that means is, it's a place where the COVID has increased the population flows, right? It's receiving more population because of COVID.
Yep.
It's kind of like the best asset in the market. So that means the people who live there are more likely to be able to work from home.
Yep.
Right. They're not going to be the first fired, as things worsen, if they worsen. So those things give me comfort that the asset, look, it may not hit the returns that we're hoping for, but it's also, I think, not going to lose anybody money because it's positioned to be resilient, right? But not everything is positioned to be resilient. Like, certain markets are not going to be resilient. Right. Certain assets are not going to be resilient because, because of the way that they're positioned and who they're their tenant base is.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go out and you make blanket statements like multifamily is always good in a recession, or C properties are good because they're cheaper. I mean, you and I both have experience with C properties.
No.
And even in the best of times, they can be difficult to operate and get your rent out of tenants. So when you're having hard times, they are not, just because they're cheaper doesn't mean that they're better. And I see the same thing happening. I mean, it's interesting that mobile home parks are receiving so much interest at the moment, because they do have, they tend to have a really, sort of lower end of the economic scale tenant base, right? I guess the thing that, what I keep on hearing from investors in that space, what keeps them, allows them to sleep at night, is that since the tenants own those homes and the homes are almost impossible to move anywhere,
fixed,
that they will, come up with the money one way or another. And I guess the pad rents are also not so expensive that it's a huge stretch for them to come up with the money. But, renting, being able to pay $300 to rent a pad is not the same thing. It's a far easier thing to do than coming up with, like the C property in your market may still be renting out for $800 or $900 a month.
For sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And because that may be the cheapest rent in the marketplace.
It is.
But that's a lot of money for people to come up with when they're unemployed, or when their hours have been cut, or whatever the case may be. Or one of the spouses loses their job. You really have to get in times like this, if you're intent on investing in these properties, you have to get very granular with who is there and where they're employed, and how sensitive those employers are to the economy. And it's just not a simple proposition of it's always a good time to buy.
Yeah, it's just not. And again, if you're going to come on my channel and you're going to want to talk about this or that, if your answer is always it's a good time to buy, we're going to have a very difficult time scheduling your meeting, which means it's not going to happen. But back to manufacturing home. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I do actually wanted to bring up, well, I'll bring this up after you ask your question.
Yeah. The one thing on manufacturing home, again, I haven't talked to anybody that's done that in a while, but I think it sort of goes back to my thesis of, quite simply, space is good. It'd be interesting to see who's moving there, because again, that's some type of ownership, right?
Right.
And you're right. The pad rent is less than, rent for a C-class apartment that's probably side by side and you're packed on top of each other. So it might just be the trend, and it's just the lowest thing somebody could buy, I guess.
Possible. Yeah. I mean, if you assume that the same thing is happening all across the economic spectrum, right?
Exactly.
Everybody who can afford to do it.
Yeah. They get in where they can, right?
We get in where they can. Yeah.
Yeah.
So one other thing that I wanted to bring up, we didn't talk about this in the pre-call, but I'm sure you saw this pop up in the last couple of days, that now something like 52% of young Americans now live with their parents.
I saw that, millennials moving home. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is something that I've been talking about for a while, as people, before we got into COVID, when the economy was super hot, and I was saying to people, look, you're overpaying for assets now. Yep. And in a recession, you're basically increasing your risk of what happens to you during a recession. Agreed. And people would say, but multifamily always does well in a recession because people can't afford to buy houses, or and C properties do well because people are going to look for cheap rent. And, the fallacy with this argument, which I've always said, is that, people always need a place to live. Yes, people need a place to live. However, that doesn't mean that they need to live in your apartment and pay your rent. Exactly. Right? It means that they may be living with they need a place to live, but that could be their car. It could be under a bridge. It could be with their parents. Yep. Right. So it could be in a different city that's cheaper to live in. Right.
Location,
it could be
that's a big one.
Somewhere else. Right. But the parents, is going to be a big thing, or their friend, they're going to move into their friend's apartment and split the rent, or
their friend's house.
Or their friend's house. Yeah, right? Exactly.
Right. Space is good. Back to that simple thesis.
The point is that if 52% of millennials are living at home now, and this is the first time this has ever happened, this means that, that the rent is too damn high. Remember? Yeah. I mean, remember the rent is too damn high, like that. And that was more than 10 years ago that was a thing. Yeah. This is the ever increasing rent, the people are paying more and more money for rentals because they say, well, rent is rising. We're going to continue. Rent is going to keep on rising. There's no supply, whatever. That kind of analysis is operating in a vacuum, which assumes that the whole entire world consists of rental properties and there are no substitutes for rental properties.
I agree.
But there are substitutes for rental properties, and the substitute is mom and dad, or your buddy, or your girlfriend, or your boyfriend, or whatever it is.
Whatever it is, yep.
And so as rents continue, or the guy you work with, right? I mean, we saw this in our C properties. We saw these people having roommates, right?
Doubled up, yep.
And this is what, or New York City is a great example of this. As the rent has climbed in New York City, you see more and more and more crazy living arrangements with people to split the rent. And of course, now that we're in a recession, a lot of those people are like, you know what, I'm out of here. I'm going home to mom and dad, or I'm moving down south where I can only have one roommate rather than four, or whatever it is, right? And so the idea that like people are going to be stuck paying those high rents, or there's always going to be somebody behind them to pay that rent, is just not true. And the recession is when you're going to find that out. And now we're actually seeing this in real time with real data. And it hasn't necessarily reflected itself in vacancies yet, but if it continues, it will. And especially if, there's a huge pipeline of rental property that's still being built, right? Which is going to increase these vacancy rates. And we know what happens with, those 8 properties that come online during, a recession.
Oh yeah.
Suddenly they're like, hey, you B tenants.
Yeah. Come on up.
Come on and, look at all these amenities we have, and we're going to charge you the same rent, or we're going to give you free rent. Usually what they do to give away free rent to make the annual rent the same. So look, I mean, this is not, there's no free lunch here. So
yeah, really where I wanted this conversation to be is it's not always time to buy. I loved your thesis in the beginning is controlling the downside, right? Back to Warren Buffett's, it's hard to make money. It's easy to lose money. When I look at my market, it's the only market I talk about in detail. I think the downside risk of multifamily, specifically C-class multifamily, is far greater than single family homes today. And that's probably true for lots of markets. But when I see the chatter, I see people out there just continually trying to raise money for multifamily of like there is no downside. And that just scares me to death. I feel for limited partners who are going to fall for this. It only goes up mentality.
Well, let's kind of restate where this came from too, because a lot of people I think have come in late to the discussion, or they don't have the benefit of the history. Sure. But there's that aphorism that you're always preparing for the last war, or you're always preparing for the last recession, right? And I think there's some of that going on right now, where what happened in the great financial crisis was that lending standards before the crisis, lending standards on homes got so ridiculously loose that people who before then never had the ability to buy homes, bought homes, and expanded the home ownership rate from the long-term, decades-long average of about 65% all the way up to 70%. So that additional 5% of households, millions of households, right, in a country this big, bought houses that they would never have been able to.
They weren't qualified to buy.
They were not qualified.
With general lending standards,
And then when the housing crisis happened, and people got foreclosed on, they walked away. They weren't able to, they had those teaser rates that reset. And suddenly you're going from interest-only mortgage to fully amortizing mortgage at the same time that maybe you've also lost your job, right? And so all those people then went back to multifamily, right? And what happened then, because of that, a lot of people then took the lesson, which wasn't accurate, that it's a recession, multifamily vacant occupancies have gone up, therefore multifamily does well in a recession.
I know.
That was the lesson that they took from that experience by only viewing things in that narrow time frame
Yes.
of a couple of years, rather than understanding what preceded it and what happened after. And the other thing that people have to realize is that the flip side of the homeownership rate increasing to 70% was that vacancies at multifamily properties going into the recession were at pretty much an all-time high on an average
Yep.
basis, right? So what that meant was that if you were buying multifamily before, basically during the housing boom, if you were buying multifamily, even if you were paying, even if the cap rates were compressed because your NOI was lower because vacancy was higher and you were underwriting these deals at a higher vacancy level, you basically got these assets at a bargain.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you got a windfall of all these people coming back into multifamily. And so you had, going into the recession, you had already de-risked those assets because you were already underwriting them at a high level of vacancy.
Yes.
And then you got lucky, right?
No, I'm glad you used that word.
Yeah.
Lucky. Because again, that's exactly what I experienced. The worst time being a landlord in my market in apartments was actually 2006 and 2007. It was because I was losing tenants who said, you know what, for first month deposit and rent, I could buy a house. That's how crazy lending got.
And I remember being a renter in New York City at that time, and it was the same thing. The landlords were falling over each other to give you, not only, I don't know, people probably, this is because New York City is a unique market. When you, in a regular market in New York City, the tenants have to come up with like 6 months of cost ahead of time.
Oh, wow.
Because you've got to pay first month's rent, last month's rent, security deposit, and which is a month's rent. And then you have to pay basically 2 months of rent to the broker.
Oh,
right?
wow. Okay.
So you got to come up with a huge amount of money up front,
right,
to rent your apartment. But what happened was, not only did landlords start giving you like a month of free rent or 2 months of free rent, they also started absorbing that broker costs of those 2 months rent.
Wow.
Right. So, because they were desperate to get.
I remember it was the worst
tenants.
Worse than
right?
today. Yes.
Yeah. So they were desperate for tenants because everyone was trying to buy a house.
That's
right.
Crazy.
So,
okay.
This does happen. Right. So that was what happened during, so single family was hot, multifamily wasn't
not
suffering, but if, it was definitely like you were not paying a premium for these assets. But anyway, so people took the wrong lesson. And then what they've seen since then is, yes, like lending standards were tougher, fewer people were buying, housing prices got crazy. So people were, it was hard for them to catch up. Right. But, to buy. But so people took this lesson, millennials don't want to own, which is never true.
Mm-hmm.
Multifamily always does well in a recession. Oh, there's too little supply. So, rents are always going to be high because the demand is always going to be there. And what you're seeing now belies a lot of that, right? With suddenly the millennials all want to buy homes and they suddenly have the money. Like where did the money come from? They supposedly didn't have it, but now they do.
Yep.
Or they're moving to different places or what have you because the rent is too high. So I think that the traditional, before the Great Recession and before people, like when I first got into the business and this whole kind of mythology of what happens in multifamily in a recession developed, the mantra was always, the most important thing for multifamily is jobs. Yeah. Jobs. That's what is important for multifamily. And, that cannot be true at the same time as multifamily does well in a recession because it's cheaper, right? Those things just don't make sense.
Yeah.
Because if people don't have the money to pay rent, they can't pay rent. Yeah, and they're going to go live with mom. They're going to go, move in with their friend, move in with their girlfriend. And like we're seeing now, people who have the means because of low interest rates are like, hey, I'm going to go buy a house. I want a house.
I'm glad we got to this point because I believe multifamily has two things working against it today. You have the most vulnerable going to be doubling up, roommates, right? So that takes a whack. But you also have the most fiscally strong going, shit, I'm going to own instead of rent. Mm-hmm. So the landlord is going to lose the top and the bottom. That's why I think multifamily has the greatest downside today. because you're losing both sides.
Yeah. And it's precisely for that reason that I would only look at B deals right now, right?
Oh
Because,
yeah, it's a good point.
and
Yep.
B deals are still going to be a little bit vulnerable because of
A's
that,
and yeah.
the A's and B's trying to poach the B tenants,
Yep.
right? But it's still, you know, it's still a better asset class because you have the tenants they have more cushion, right? And they're less vulnerable to losing their jobs, but they don't have as much cushion as like an A tenant who's just going to make the decision that, okay, it's fiscally more sensible for me to buy right now, or I want to buy now, so and I have the means to do it. The B tenants, obviously, some of them can,
right?
Some of them definitely can, but it's not.
It's not a disproportionate amount
the way that it is with A, and you're not having the new supply come on in the B space, right? So, but you still have to be careful. You can't just, again, take that as a blanket statement. Oh, Jonathan Twombly says go buy B properties. Like you can't just take. You have to really get granular and look at like the competition in the market. What's the new supply in the market? What's who is this tenant base? Where are they working? All of those things totally have to be part of the analysis to determine that this deal is. And as I said, if you're investing now, and a lot of people, there are those people out there who just feel like they just never want to have money that's not working for them, whatever.
Yeah.
If that's who you are, or like you're a family office that just is cranking out, they just need to put it someplace. They don't want to have it all in cash. You have to, those people who need to be investing right now, there are still opportunities in places to invest, but you really have to be thinking about what is the downside risk.
Yes, I agree.
And just along these lines, what you're seeing with the family office is the very sophisticated investors are very, 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 very interested right now in preferred equity, right? Because they're willing to forego the upside that comes with common equity in return for a higher position in the capital stack and more certainty of not only getting their returns paid, but getting their money back.
Not losing capital.
So they're willing to forego all or almost all of the upside on a property in order to have that
certainty,
more secure position within the capital stack. And there's a tremendous amount. I mean, the appetite for preferred equity now is enormous for precisely this reason, because they're thinking on the one hand, they've got this money, they really need to place it. They can't just have it sitting in cash. But on the other hand, they want it to be more secure. And the preferred equity tends to pay a higher coupon to compensate for the lack of upside. So all these things, are making those family offices just really, really interested in preferred equity at the moment.
That's interesting. That actually tells me a lot. I call the smart money, or whatever you want to call it. Yeah. I mean, that doesn't paint a rosy picture. I mean, if you really look at what they're trading off, they don't see a bright future. They wouldn't be giving that up if they were all rosy.
Yeah, exactly. They're preparing for the downside. That's also why private money lending is also so interesting to them too, because they're secured with the asset
first,
and they're in first position, and they know that they can, probably the greatest extent of their downside loss is like about a 20% haircut. If things
totally
decline and then they have to foreclose on the asset, they're not losing everything, right? They're not wiped out like the equity is. So they're willing to take that risk of that haircut.
Yeah, man, this is always fun. I always look forward to our Thursday conversations. Any closing comments? Do you want to talk about your new course that you just released? I saw it's
Actually,
out, I think.
Before we talk about that,
sure.
It's not quite out yet. It's coming, but we didn't talk about the eviction moratorium.
Oh, let's talk about that. Yes, sorry.
Yeah.
CDC.
Yeah. So in like another episode of like Bizarro World 2020, the CDC, who knows that the CDC had power to do this, no idea. Which I think is, again, sort of, it's yet another one of these things that is dubious, but only in this case, probably more people will challenge it. There are people who are interested in challenging it, but the CDC, enabled by the president, has now created this eviction ban, which is just, I find it bizarre on so many levels. But the upshot is that now we have, the CDC exercising some power under the umbrella of the executive to prevent people from being kicked out of their apartments. However, I do think that this is a little more narrowly tailored than some of the other eviction bans.
Certainly.
So, which is, I guess a good thing. If the states could be made to follow these guidelines as well,
Sure.
where people have to prove that that they can't pay because of COVID, and they've also tried to take advantage of all of the relief stuff that's out there, and they have unsuccessfully, or even with that relief, they still can't pay, and they can't pay because of COVID. So I think imposing those conditions is a good thing. It sort of ratchets it down to something that is at least sort of fair under the circumstances.
Yeah, I would say it's seemingly reasonable, having read it.
Yeah. Nevertheless, I mean, there hasn't been any accompanying relief for landlords to say, well, if your tenants meet that criteria and they can't pay, well, and now you can't kick them out and try to find somebody else who might be able to pay. Yeah. This is on landlords and just transferring the risk to them.
I think it's one of the things I wanted to say here, if this came up, is mom and pop landlords, which I include myself in, are being asked to absorb the pain when Congress won't do their job. Right? Congress didn't extend the unemployment benefit, which was a thing that helped a lot of tenants pay rent. So now, because of CDC and the president, I mean, he's the one that did it. And oh, by the way, he's supposedly a real estate guy, which just drives me crazy. Whatever. But anyways, he did this on his watch, and now mom and pop landlords are absorbing pain because Congress can't do their job.
Yeah, I mean, sort of like philosophically, I'm not like, I don't have any kind of philosophical objection to the government kind of getting involved in the economy. But what I do feel is the government, let's say, if the government makes a policy decision that X is going to happen, right, then the government should bear the cost, and then it should be spread out amongst all the taxpayers, right, as a matter of public policy. The government shouldn't be doing what it does, say, like here in New York, which is to say, the rent is too high, but we're not going to subsidize rent or do anything about it. We're just going to tell you landlords that you bear the cost. And you can't raise rents and you can't kick people out, right? So that kind of policy response is really irresponsible and counterproductive in my view.
Correct. It is.
If the state of New York wants to help people who can't afford housing, well, then we as like New Yorkers should just pay more taxes for that to happen, and give them people money to pay their rent. That's fine. I don't really have any great objection to that personally, but I think it's, and other people obviously differ with that, right? Sure. But what I find objectionable is the state of New York saying, okay, we have this problem with affordability, so hey, you landlords, you're going to bear the brunt of this.
Yeah, me too.
Because we can force you to, and we're not going to help you, and we're just going to shift the whole burden onto you. Like that just strikes me as being unfair.
Oh yeah, it's unfair. What they did with it. So the CDC thing, and compared to other moratoriums that I've read about, and again, I'm in California, so we've had them since freaking March. It's everyone. You are generally speaking addressing the lower end of the income stack because there are income limits, right? 99 grand single, 198 grand couple. Right. Right. So this is narrowly bad. What I did like in it is it does give me the ability to evict a problem tenant. Much narrowly focused in California, right? California for 4 months, I couldn't evict anybody, even if you were a documented drug dealer, right? The courts were closed. I couldn't do anything, right? So they've given me outs for problem tenants. But yeah, I think the government came in and picked winners and losers. I think mom and pop landlords, many of them are going to go 9 months without a check, and they're going to lose their properties. I think we will see some mom and pop landlords, A, lose, and then B, get so frustrated they'll sell, and we're going to have less inventory. Rent control, what happens? Less inventory. We are going to have less rental units exactly when we want rental units at the end of this, and it's because of bad policy. So, yeah.
Well, on that happy note.
Yeah.
So just so I do have, as you mentioned, thank you for bringing it up. I have a mini course coming out very soon on how to get brokers to show you those backroom deals.
I love the
Yeah,
title, backroom deals. That's sexy. Good job.
that's what you want. I mean, you want the backroom deals
Yeah.
because those are the best deals, and they're hard to get when you're new, but
Yep.
not impossible. And I have a methodology that works. I've used it myself. I've taught my students to do it. It's worked for them. Uh, doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to find deals that work for your criteria. I don't want to create a misconception. These
Yep.
are not necessarily cheap deals, but these are the best deals in a broker's pocket, the ones
Yes.
that they only show to their best clients. May still be market rate, but these are the best ones,
Yeah,
right?
you need
So
attempts. That's what you need in this business. You need
that's right.
attempts.
So if you want to get in with brokers, if you want to learn how to build relationships with brokers in a way that really works, right? Ignore all the guru crap about how you go after brokers and do the thing that has worked for me and worked for my students. This mini course is going to show you how to do this. Now, this should be available in the next couple of weeks. If you want to learn more about this, the course is basically done. It's just the tech stuff is taking a little extra time because my tech person got pneumonia. So she was out, but she's back, fortunately. So she's working on this, getting it all ready for you guys. And if you want to learn more about this, I am posting about this in my Facebook group, Multifamily Investment Community. Also, Michael, I don't know if you realize this. I actually have a second Facebook group now, so Multifamily Investment Community is all about learning, right? This is a networking and learning group. You cannot post deals. You may not talk about your business. Like, you can't solicit business in this group. It is purely learning and networking.
Cool.
But lots of people wanted to be able to do that, to post deals, to be able to promote their business. So I created a second group. It's a sister group called Multifamily Dealmakers Community.
I did not know that.
Where you are allowed you still have to follow the rules, but you are allowed to go and post deals, promote your business, and what have you. So both of those groups, you'll be learning about this program when it's ready to go.
Awesome.
But I encourage you to join both.
Very cool, Jonathan. I will look up that second group. Thank you for that information. You have a great week and take care.
You too. Thanks again.